see coming out now is not necessarily going to sway the course of the conflict that we see, but it is definitely swaying the course of Netanyahu and his coalition's ambition for this radical judicial reform they've been pushing for.
And Mr. Outzen, how will this verdict make matters worse, or rather impact the Israel-Hamas war?
Well, I think if we look at the U.S. as a sort of a analog for this, what we see is that you first, in a democracy, have overwhelming sort of coalition or agreement to take care of the immediate security threat. And everything I've seen with regards to Israeli public opinion shows that they all want to make sure there's never a terror attack like what happened on October 7th again from Gaza. So I don't think this is going to change the sort of mainstream Israeli view on stopping Hamas terror coming from Gaza. And yet I think this is definitely heavy handwriting on the wall for the Netanyahu administration with regards to their very ambitious goals for rewriting the social contract in Israel. So I think this is not today's business, but this is the day after tomorrow's business, and it has very big implications for Netanyahu personally.
All right, Karl, you speak of how this will have implications on Netanyahu personally, and the verdict comes at a very precarious time in Israel when the country is at war with Hamas, and we've seen plummeting popularity of Netanyahu itself in the country. But talk to us about the impact of this verdict on Netanyahu's corruption cases. He has a bribery case and 3 different cases which were filed in 2019.
Yeah, well, I mean, generally speaking, I think the judicial establishment in Israel has been very skeptical of Netanyahu and his interpretations of how his own personal business and how the executive branch, so to speak, in Israel and the political branch relates to the judicial. I think, to put it maybe over simply, the judicial branch and most of the opposition in Israel, which is probably over half the population, think that he has not observed the separation of powers necessary in a democracy. So I think what we'll see is the same sort of thing that happened ultimately with previous Israeli leaders who overstepped kind of their domestic mandate. And now, look, I want to make this point. In Israel, there is a strong consensus on self-defense. There's a strong consensus on defending yourself in war and against terrorism. But there's also a strong consensus that no political leader is above the law. And I think there's a real chance that this is a sort of a bellwether marking that the Israeli general body politic views that Netanyahu has overstepped that.
Turn of events out there in Israel at the moment, but thank you so much, Colonel Outzen, for joining us and sharing us with us your insights. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
For rapid changes in the battlefield in the Israel-Hamas war. Now, this even as the Israeli army spokesperson warned that the war on the besieged enclaves Hamas rulers will continue throughout 2024. The IDF spokesperson said that there are plans to shift tactics and cut back on troop numbers. And in the first drawdown since the war began almost 3 months ago, Israel has pulled back tanks out of some districts in Gaza City and is also withdrawing some forces from Gaza to shift to more targeted operations against Hamas militants. Israel is partially returning reservists to civilian life to help the economy. Now, as the war looks set to last well into the new year, since launching the war in retaliation for the cross-border Hamas rampage 2 months ago, Israeli officials have said that they would wage the war in 3 main stages. Now, the first was intense shelling to clear access routes for ground forces and encourage civilians to evacuate. The second was the invasion that began on October 27th, with tanks and troops having now overrun much of the Gaza Strip and largely asserting control despite Palestinian gunmen continuing their ambushes from hidden tunnels and bunkers. Now, according to an Israel official, the military is moving into its third stage, which is to a more localized mopping up operations. And the change in shifting tactics comes as the U.S. Navy announced the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier strike group will be heading back to America, and months after being deployed in West Asia to provide protection for Israel on the sea. The Ford and the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower aircraft carriers have been part of a two-carrier presence bracketing the Israel-Hamas war, underscoring U.S. concerns that the conflict will widen. Now, the Ford and its accompanying warships will be replaced by the amphibious assault ship, the USS Bataan, and its accompanying warships, the USS Mesa Verde and the USS Carter Hall. Now, the economic cost of Gaza war is weighing on Israel, and while it is impossible and inhumane to put a price on the lives lost due to the war, financial modeling figures are forecasting a devastating loss to the Israel economy.
Well, the question being, will the financial impact of the war lead to an end to the hostilities? Our next report gets you a complete picture. Take a look.
As the war in Gaza rages on beyond 87 days, the toll on both sides is becoming increasingly evident. In Gaza, over half of the buildings and two-thirds of homes are damaged or destroyed. More than 21,000 lives lost and 1.8 million people displaced. This is according to the Gaza Health Ministry. While it's impossible and inhumane to put a price on the lives lost, economists are now forecasting the economic toll on the Israeli economy and likening it to the shock experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. Government spending has skyrocketed since October 7, with over 220,000 reservists deployed, taxing an economy already facing challenges. The Israeli economy is taking a hit, with the GDP expected to fall from a forecasted 3% growth in 2023 to a mere 1% in 2024. Some experts even anticipate contraction for the Israeli economy. And it's not just the macroeconomics. The high-tech sector, often considered the engine of Israel's economy, is grappling with the consequences. Reservists, many of whom work in tech, are torn between their military duty and their roles in research and development. As policymakers debate the war's duration, ordinary Israelis are concerned about its economic fallout. A recent poll shows that 45% of Israelis fear economic hardship due to the conflict. Israel has a resilient economy, but the challenges posed by the war, coupled with pre-existing issues, have left workers idle, construction halted, and tourism at a standstill. As for day 87 of the war, Israel is expected to have lost close to $20 billion in decreased tax revenue and will continue to lose around $220 million per day until hostilities cease. While we examine the grim numbers and the devastating visuals from Gaza, it's crucial to remember that the true cost of the war in Gaza is not just financial. It is measured in lives lost and unimaginable human suffering. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
And the constant bombarding and fierce fighting in Gaza continues. Hamas officials in Gaza say that the strikes have killed more than 21,800 people, and international mediators are pushing for a truce deal and stress on the need for a two-state solution. However, amid this, Israeli politicians are endorsing the redevelopment of settlements in the Gaza Strip. National Security Minister and Finance Minister also encouraged the voluntary emigration of Palestinians, and both ministers claim that the solution to the long-running conflicts in the migration is the migration of Palestinian civilians. Now, they also said that Gazans should be encouraged to migrate to countries willing to take them as refugees, while adding that Israel will permanently control the territory of Gaza Strip. And this is not the first time an Israeli lawmaker is suggesting such steps. Over the years, in fact, a number of lawmakers have pushed for the resettlement of Palestinians from Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, with several other members of the international community, however, have strongly rejected such plans. Meanwhile, a former Israeli defense minister has called for reoccupation of southern Lebanon, and he says that Israelis should only release the territory when there is a government in Beirut that can exercise its sovereignty.
Now, there are signs of rapid changes in the battlefield in the Israel-Gaza war. This even as the Israeli army spokesperson has warned that the war on the besieged enclaves rulers Hamas will continue throughout 2024. Now, the IDF spokesperson has said there are now plans to shift tactics and to cut back on troop numbers. Now, the first drawdown since the war began almost about 3 months ago. Israel has pulled back tanks out of some districts in the Gaza city, and it is also withdrawing some forces from the Gaza Strip to shift to more targeted operations against Hamas. Now, Israel is partially returning its reservists to civilian life to help with the economy. So the war looks set to last well into the new year, since launching the war in retaliation for the cross-border Hamas rampage 2 months ago. The Israeli officials have said that they would in fact wage the war in 3 main stages. The first is intense shelling to clear an access route for ground forces and also to encourage civilians to evacuate. The second is the invasion that began on the 27th of October with tanks and troops having now overrun much of the Gaza Strip, largely asserting almost complete control despite the Palestinian resistance fighters continuing with their ambushes from hidden tunnels and bunkers. Now, according to an Israeli official, the military is now moving to the third stage, which is a more localized mopping up operation. Now, the shifting tactics have come as the U.S. Navy has announced that the U.S.'s Gerald Ford aircraft carrier strike group will be heading back to America months after having been deployed in West Asia to provide protection for Israel on the sea. Now, the Fort Gerald and the Dwight Eisenhower aircraft carriers have been part of a 2-carrier presence, bracketing the American support for this war by Israel on the Gaza Strip. It has also underscored American concerns that this conflict could potentially widen. The Fort and also its accompanying warships will be replaced by the amphibious assault ship, the USS Bataan, and its accompanying warships, the USS Mesa Verde and also the USS Carter Hall.
And away from the war front, trouble continues to mount for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In the latest setback at home, Israel's Supreme Court has struck down a controversial law passed by the Netanyahu administration. Well, on Monday, the Supreme Court ruled 8-7 in favor of striking down a contentious law that had triggered countrywide demonstration for months. The new legislation passed by Israel's right-wing government had weakened the judicial powers. The provision had struck down on the Supreme Court's ability to quash certain government decisions. The law was a part of a judicial overhaul which led to massive demonstrations across Israel for 39 weeks. Well, thousands of Israelis took to the streets every Saturday against the law, protesting against Netanyahu's move to weaken the judicial system that critics feared would severely undermine Israel's democratic institutions. The Prime Minister's party has called the Supreme Court's decision to strike down a provision of the judicial overhaul, and I'm quoting here, opposition to the nation's desire for unity, especially at a time of war. Well, Israel's Justice Minister has also slammed the verdict, accusing the top court, and I'm quoting again, taking into their hands all the powers. The court ruling comes as a major setback for Netanyahu, as the leader is currently in the middle of a corruption trial. The proceedings had earlier paused after the deadly October 7th attack, but the trial resumed on December 4th. Netanyahu is facing a slew of charges, including fraud, bribery, and breach of trust, in 3 different cases which were filed in 2019. With the Supreme Court thwarting the Netanyahu government's attempt to dilute judicial power, there remains concerns over how the simmering constitutional crisis plays out for Israel's longest-serving prime minister.
אנחנו במלחמה על קיומנו. במלחמה זו.
And for more on the story, we were earlier joined by Colonel Rich Outson from Washington, D.C. This is what he had to say on this. Take a look.
The timing of this is interesting. Of course, the judicial calendar does not always line up with the geopolitical calendar. And the fact that Israel is engaged in a major conflict at the moment, the war in Gaza, at the time that this comes to fruition, this new judicial decision, is a sensitive matter. I think most Israelis are united in wanting to see Israel take care of its security concerns with regards to Hamas and its ability to attack Israel and conduct terror operations. And yet, the majority of the Israeli population was also very much against this judicial reform. So I think in a democracy, it's messy. And I think that what we see coming out now is not necessarily going to sway the course of the conflict that we see, but it is definitely swaying the course of Netanyahu and his coalition's ambition for this radical judicial reform they've been pushing for.
המלחמה נמצאת בעיצומה. אנחנו נלחמים בכל החזיתות.
أنا بتمنى أرجع لركام منزلي في عام 2024.
On New Year's Day, Israeli tanks pulled out of some Gaza City districts. But ahead of its planned troop reduction, Israel says the war in Gaza still has many months to go. Speaking at a media briefing, the Israeli Prime Minister repeated that Israel will continue to fight until the completion of all its objectives.
המלחמה נמצאת בעיצומה.
The war is in full swing. We are fighting on all fronts. We have great successes, but we also have painful prices. Achieving victory requires more time. As the Chief of Staff said this week, the war will continue for many more months. My policy is clear. We continue to fight until the completion of all the objectives of the war, and above all, the elimination of Hamas and the release of all our abductees.
So even as Israel signals a potential shift in its tactics, Israeli forces killed Adil Mizmar, a commander in the Hamas's Nakba force, who allegedly led the October 7th massacre in South Israel. He is also believed to have directed Hamas gunmen to other communities, including the kibbutz of Nirim and Be'eri. The IDF maintains that Mizmar has been heavily involved in the fighting in the Gaza Strip since October 7th. As per the Israeli military, the Nakba commander was killed in an Israeli Air Force airstrike directed by Israeli ground troops. At the same time, in a major development, with the Israeli military increasingly gaining control on the ground, the IDF has decided to release 5 brigades from combat in the Gaza Strip. The brigades tasked with training soldiers will return to carrying out their usual activity.
These days, we are also adjusting the plan of forces deployment in Gaza, and in the array of reservists, some of the reservist soldiers will return to their families and their jobs this week. This will allow a significant relief for the economy and will allow them to gather strength ahead of the coming activities in the next year, and the fighting will continue and we will need them.
In Gaza, the bombardment continues. The scale of suffering in the besieged strip continues to be alarming. Residents of Sheikh Radwan district in Gaza City said tanks were withdrawn after 10 days of the most intense warfare in the conflict. As the new year dawns, there is one hope and prayer by the displaced Palestinians that the conflict comes to an end and they return home.
My New Year wish is to see truce being reached as quickly as possible, so that I can go back to Gaza City, go back home, return to school and reunite with my friends, since I have been missing my friends, Gaza City and my home so much.
On Saturday, Benjamin Netanyahu said the country must retake control of Gaza's border with Egypt. Retaking the border would be a de facto reversal of Israel's 2005 withdrawal from Gaza, raising new questions over the future of the enclave and prospects for a Palestinian state. Helit Barel is the former director at Israel's National Security Council. She is now joining us live from Tel Aviv. Helit, Happy New Year and thank you for making time for us. Welcome. Talk to us about Israel's gains in the war by eliminating the commander of the Nakba force. With your own intel, what else do you think is left? Because most of the masterminds of the heinous October 7th attack have been eliminated. And why is Israel reducing its troops?
Well, I think we need to understand that as important as it is to get those involved for what they had done and to eliminate the heads, those are things that are important. They are symbolic. They can certainly affect what...
We seem to have lost Helit Barrel. We'll get her in a few moments because we understand that Israel is planning to reduce its troops in the war. And again, we do understand that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that the war will continue for as long as it takes until Hamas is completely eliminated. And we also understand that with the new year comes a new dawn for Palestinians because they have to move, still have to move southwards. And we want to understand why the Israeli government resorted to reducing their troops in the Gaza Strip. So we are trying to get Helit Barrel, who is the former director at Israel's National Security Council. She's now back. Helit, good to see you back again. Yeah, sorry, we lost you there. What were you saying?
Yep. Sorry for the connectivity issue. I'm saying that getting the heads of Hamas's military forces is important both symbolically and it's important because of their ability to command and for the morale of the troops. But having said that, that's not really how you win a war. How you win a war is everything combined at once. And so Israel's control on the ground, but also Israel's ability to now make gains in the underground complex of Hamas is no less important and possibly more important in being able to significantly degrade Hamas's abilities to wage war and to govern the Gaza Strip. And I think that is really the target. To actually get each and every one, including Yahya Sinwar, for example, might take much longer. And that's okay. It will happen. It just might take much longer. And it doesn't necessarily require the mode of war that we have been in so far. You need to understand when Israel first went into the Gaza Strip after October 7th, it took 2 weeks, but when we did go in, we went in fighting truly an army, a terror organization that has raised an army, that amount of weaponry and that amount of training and the underground facilities. But now they've been reduced really back to what they are, which is a terrorist organization. And I think the right way to fight a terrorist organization is not necessarily with the same amount of forces. So the withdrawal of forces makes sense on a lot of levels to me.
Helit, before I let you go, very quickly, why is Israel reducing their troops?
Once again, I think we're now facing in Gaza more of a guerrilla situation than we are a full-out war, army to army, as it was in the beginning. I think, we have amassed a lot of forces in Gaza, have gotten pretty strong control of the northern part of Gaza, still working at it on the southern part. It's inconsistent there, but there simply probably is a better way to continue and pursue the goals of the war, which, as I remind you, are first and foremost the return of 129 hostages, and second, to completely degrade Hamas's capacity to wage war, to rule in the Gaza Strip, to have any meaningful presence there. Of course, that will also require a political solution. It can't only be a military solution. And of course, it will require some sort of political resolution of the hostage situation as well.
All right, I've been talking to Helit Barrel. He's a former director at Israel's National Security Council. Helit, thank you very much for talking to us today, and Happy New Year to you again.
Thank you.
And a top focus we're on right now. An Israeli minister on Monday called for the return of Jewish settlers to Gaza and said that Palestinians should be encouraged to emigrate. A day after similar remarks by another far-right politician, Israel unilaterally withdrew the last of its troops and settlers in 2005. Now, the 2005 move ended a presence inside Gaza that began in 1967. But Israel has maintained a near complete control over the enclave's borders. Israel's fireband National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir said, and I am quoting him here, "We must promote a solution to encourage the emigration of Gaza's residents." The government under Prime Minister Netanyahu has not officially suggested that it has any plans to evict Gazans or to send Jewish settlers back to the territory. But Ben-Gvir argued that the departure of Palestinians and re-establishment of Israeli settlements is a correct, just, moral and humane solution. Hamas dismissed Ben-Gvir's proposal as a daydream. In a statement, the Islamist group said, and I'm quoting again, "You will not find a way to implement it in the face of our steadfast Palestinian people and their heroic resistance." Now, Ben-Gvir's comment comes a day after far-right finance minister Bezalel Smotrich also called for the return of settlers to Gaza. The minister stated that Israel should encourage the territory's approximately 2.5 million Palestinians to leave. Smotrich said that for Israel to control the enclave militarily for a long time, we need a civilian existence. Both Ben-Gvir and Smotrich live in settlements in the West Bank, considered illegal under the international law. Hamas has condemned Smotrich's comments as a wild mockery and a war crime. The October 7th Hamas attack left over 1,100 people dead in Israel, mostly civilians. As per the Gaza officials, Israel's ongoing offensive aimed at destroying Hamas has killed over 21,000 people in Gaza, mostly women and children. With heavy combat raging on, the United Nations says that 85% of people in Gaza have been internally displaced. For Palestinians, the war has revived memories of the greatest trauma. Hundreds of thousands of people fled or were forced from their homes during the fighting surrounding Israel's creation in 1948. The minister's remarks have once again put the spotlight on long-standing Egyptian fears that Israel wants to make Gaza into Egypt's problem. Egypt has made clear throughout the latest war that it does not want to take in a wave of Palestinian refugees. Egypt has long feared that Israel wants to force a permanent expulsion of Palestinians into its territory, as happened during the war surrounding Israel's independence. Egypt ruled Gaza between 1948 and 1967, that is, when Israel captured the territory. Along with the West Bank and East Jerusalem, the vast majority of Gaza's population are the descendants of Palestinian refugees uprooted from what is now Israel. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has said that a mass influx of refugees from Gaza would eliminate the Palestinian nationalist cause. He said that it would also risk bringing militants into Sinai, where they might launch attacks on Israel, and such a scenario would endanger the country's 1979 peace treaty. The Egyptian president proposed that Israel instead house Palestinians in its Negev desert, which neighbors the Gaza Strip, until it ends its military operations in Gaza. On Friday, South Africa launched a case at the International Court of Justice against Israel for what it said were genocidal acts in Gaza. In the Hague application, South Africa also stated that Israel has been acting to destroy Palestinians in Gaza as a part of the broader Palestinian national, racial and ethnic group.
Shifting our focus now to the war in Gaza, where unrelenting Israeli bombardment rocked the Strip yesterday. This comes in the backdrop of the Israeli army spokesperson saying that the war on Hamas leaders in Gaza would continue well into 2024. In the latest, Israel has started to withdraw some forces from Gaza towards shifting focus to more targeted operations against Hamas. Moreover, the Israeli Defense Forces are partially returning to reservists to civilian life. And IDF spokesperson says that 2 reservist brigades would be released this week.
In accordance with the recommendations given by the IDF and the defense establishment, we will soon be able to return communities home in areas within a range of 4 to 7 kilometers north of the Gaza Strip. The first group of 7 communities has already decided and they have received the message. Kibbutz Dorot, where we are right now, is one of them.
Another official said the military is now entering their third phase of operation. Tanks and troops have largely taken control of the Gaza Strip, even though Palestinian gunmen are still ambushing people from underground tunnels and bunkers. Meanwhile, as Israel bombarded the Gaza Strip on Monday, Gaza's health ministry said the attacks had killed 156 people. Drone footage shows destruction of a residential building in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza following the airstrike. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society, or PRCS, also released a video post the attacks. The video showed the organization's rescuers gathering 6 dead and 2 injured women from the Maghazi camp in central Gaza. The aid organization has also set up a new tent camp to expand aid operations. As per the reports, the camp can accommodate 300 families of PRCS staff. It will later expand to 1,000 tents that will shelter other civilians charged space. The impact of the war of Gaza extends beyond human life. Several animals have also fallen prey to the deadly war. Animals at a zoo in Gaza's southern city of Rafah are dying of hunger. Many displaced Palestinians are now taking shelter in a zoo where 4 monkeys have already died of starvation. A 5th one is also sick as people scramble to help the exhausted animal drink water and eat food. All this comes amid a major ongoing judicial crackdown in Israel. Israel's top court ruled on Monday against a key component of the government's controversial legal overhaul. The overhaul challenged the powers of the judiciary and sparked mass protests.
Now, moving on, unrelenting Israeli bombardment rocked Gaza on Monday, and this comes in the backdrop of the Israeli army spokesperson saying that the war on Hamas leaders in Gaza would continue well into 2024 as well.
When the latest, Israel has started to withdraw some forces from Gaza towards shifting focus to more targeted operations against Hamas. Moreover, the Israeli Defense Forces are partially returning reservists to civilian life. Well, an IDF spokesperson said 2 reservist brigades would be released this week. Take a listen.
In accordance with the recommendations given by the IDF and the defense establishment, we will soon be able to return communities home in areas within a range of 4 to 7 kilometers north of the Gaza Strip. The first group of 7 communities has already decided and they have received the message. Kibbutz Dorot, where we are right now, is one of them.
Now, another official said that the military is now